Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. As you might know, I not only do typewriter videos, but I really started this channel doing videos about pinhole photography and homemade cameras. And one of the things I was really interested in and still am interested in is the so-called Afghan box cameras. There's a number of videos that I've made on the subject of my own homemade Afghan box camera project. There's a couple books, though, I've collected over the years. This one called Afghan Box Camera by Lewis Burke and Sean Foley. And this later book, this just recently came out by Lewis Burke, called Box Camera Now. This is actually bound in laser-cut plywood, sort of resembling a box, if you will. Both of these document the work of contemporary Afghan box camera photographers around the world. And as I was reading through this book just last week, I started getting inspired again to work with my Afghan box camera project, and I started drawing some ideas in my journal book and writing some ideas down, really. And I was thinking, the limitation of the Afghan box camera is you have to use it as a camera to take a portrait of somebody. But it's also a darkroom, and so it has chemical trays. And so the camera itself, you have to kind of keep level. You can't just tilt it up or down because you'll slosh out all the chemicals in the trays inside the camera. And also you're using photographic paper as a paper negative, and that paper is really slow photographically, and the tonal range is limited to the blue and UV spectrum of light. And so I started thinking this crazy idea last week of what if you took a phone camera and took a picture of somebody, right, a portrait, converted it to black and white in the phone, which is really easy to do on an iPhone, and then if you could invert the image in the camera to be a negative image, which you can do. Let's say you built a Afghan box camera where it had two parts. It had the rear part was the traditional Afghan box camera with a lens and developing trays and an arm sleeve where you reach your hand in, you can load a sheet of photo paper and you can develop it. And then let's say there's a front section of the camera in front of the lens that has a holder for your little digital device that has this digital negative image on it. You created a digital negative and you put that in there. And let's say the lens in this camera is preset focused onto the screen of your device. Then a single sheet of photo paper, you can photograph the screen and get a positive print off of a digital negative. So that was the idea I had. So I'm going to test it out today. I'm not going to actually build a Afghan box camera yet with this arrangement. My current Afghan box camera, the lens is on the front of it, so it's not internal. But I want to just do some tests with my 4x5 Intrepid view camera and develop a paper negative in my darkroom. But I want to experiment with photographing the screen of my device, see if it'll work, right? Well, it turns out that this is an older iPhone 6S, and it actually has a cracked protector screen. And I haven't gotten around to replacing it. So it has a few cracks in it, and that would show up in the picture. So instead of using the iPhone, I have this older device, which is my iPod Touch. iPod Touch is almost the same size, a little bit smaller than the iPhone 6S, and it has a nice clean screen. And it also has an older version of iOS, but it will work for inverting the positive digital image into a negative digital image. There's a good chance that somebody out there watching right now doesn't know what an Afghan box camera is. So these have been around for at least 100 years. And what they are is a combination of box camera where you can take an image on either film or photographic paper usually, and a little portable developing laboratory in the camera where you can reach your hand in through an arm sleeve so it's light tight, and you can manipulate the paper negative and load it in the camera and then take it out and develop it in the trays and get a paper negative. And then the traditional Afghan box camera, there is a easel that you set up in front of the lens, and set up your paper negative, and you re-photograph it on another sheet of paper to make the positive. So it's like a two-step process is the traditional way of doing the Afghan box camera. Thinking about this now, one of the advantages of using a digital device like this is that you're not restricted to compositions where you have to seat the subject in front of your camera and maybe adjust the tripod to get the camera level, and you can't really move the Afghan box camera around that easy because it has chemicals in it, right, in trays that slosh around. The advantage of the phone or the tablet device or mobile device is you can handhold it, you can take pictures at different angles. It has a decent enough camera that you can actually photograph people at night or indoors in dim indoor lighting where paper negatives just wouldn't work. You would have a really long exposure time. I'm going to get set up and try to photograph this, but let me first show you how we take an inverted image of a photo on your camera roll. Stay tuned. Okay, so what you want to do to make a negative image or a digital negative is you're going to take a photo out of your camera roll. In this case, I took a quick snapshot with the front-facing camera on this iPod Touch, converted it to black and white, adjusted the tones, contrast, and whatever. Now what you're going to do is you're going to go to your Settings menu, and we're going to go to General. On this older version of iOS, there is a feature called Accessibility. There's Display Accommodations and Invert Colors. And you're going to choose Smart Invert Option. Okay, Smart Invert Option. Now, we're going to exit out of the settings, and we're going to go back to our photo camera roll. And you want to be full screen as we are now, and you're going to press and hold the power button and then toggle the home button. And that will make a screen grab of whatever's on the screen. So now we're going to go back to our settings and we're going to turn off Smart Invert. And then we're going to go back to our camera roll. And that picture that we took is now a digital negative. You can do more adjustments to this image. If you needed to adjust the shadows or highlights or contrast, you can hit Edit and you can adjust this picture as you need. And that's going to be probably an important thing as we calibrate the exposure for our paper negatives, is we're going to probably want to adjust the highlights and the shadows and the brightness to get it so our exposure is consistent. But that's basically how you make a digital negative on an iOS device from a positive digital image. Well, here we are in the little darkroom that I haven't used in months, and of course it's a little cold out here. So I'm going to use Developer, Stop Bath, Fixer in these three trays, water baths in these. I go back and forth. This just preserves the longevity of the chemicals. I've already pre-rinsed these trays with warm water to heat the trays up, and I've also poured up fresh Developer, and I've microwaved all the chemicals. Let me put the Fixer in first so it's not top heavy. So I've already microwaved all this. If you do microwave your chemicals, be sure you wipe up any residual dribbles out of your microwave if you're using it for food. And also the Fixer heats up a lot faster than the other two chemicals, so I usually heat it up separately. It gets hot really quick because of the silver ions in the solution will absorb microwaves quite readily. So fresh Developer, it's 10:1 LPD Developer, and Stop Bath is just white vinegar. Fixer I mixed up last year sometime. And so let's get our camera set up on the tripod, and we're going to try to do the exposure in the darkroom because I can turn the lights off and eliminate glare. Well, I'm going to try to take a meter reading, reflective reading off the screen, keeping in mind there is some white borders, so I'm going to try to just get my face here right down there. I have the meter set to ISO 12, which is my normal ISO for this Arista Grade 2 paper. So it's a 5.6 lens, and it's recommending about 30 seconds exposure. However, I did a little focus test in the office before I came out here, and I realized that I had to draw the bellows out pretty far. I actually mounted the front standard on the front hole up here. There's 3 different mounting holes on the Intrepid. I used the front one so I can get more draw on the lens, and so I'm going to have to compensate for bellows extension. So instead of it being f5.6, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm going to call it f11, let's say at 60 seconds. It'll probably be about f11 and 60-second exposure is what we'll try here. Well, okay, so camera, iPod Touch are set up. I got 2 paper negatives in my holder. They're not pre-flash because I don't expect to be pre-flashing my paper negatives in an Afghan box camera. Chemicals are ready to go. I'm going to do an initial exposure with the lens set to 5.6, but exposure of a minute, which would be like f11, which is fairly close to what the extension is on the bellows here, and we'll adjust from there on the second exposure. Okay, well, this is the view screen of the Intrepid, focused and composed, and lights are off in the darkroom. The door's ajar right now, and there's the iPod Touch. I now have the first paper negative exposed, and time to process it. I guess I'll turn my iPod Touch off. Well, funny things happen when you haven't used your darkroom in a long time. So when I put it into the developer, I waited almost 3 minutes and it really had barely developed. So I actually just splashed more LPD developer concentrate in it, thinking that maybe that bottle of LPD might be getting a little exhausted, but it resulted, I think, in excessive contrast. So I'm not too worried about my shirt, because in the actual image you can see my shirt is pretty much exactly white, so in the negative, so I expected the shirt to be black. But in terms of my face, there's too much contrast. The shadows need to come up. But if you look at the bright side of my face, it's already really bright. So I think what I need to do is reduce the contrast of the negative image in the actual iPod Touch itself. Well, okay, so click on the image, we'll hit edit. We will select the little edit symbol right here. Select light. This is the older version of iOS. And I want to select contrast. And I want to drop the contrast like something like about maybe like that. That looks more like a normal photographic negative. Alright, and we will done. We will save that, and now let's try another print of that. Well, okay, it looks like we have better results. This was the initial 1 minute exposure at a higher contrast setting on the iPod Touch. This was lower contrast. My meter only suggested 8 seconds instead of a minute. A dramatic difference because of changing the contrast, and I gave it like 10 seconds. But you'll notice that the top and bottom of the image are not straight, so it was actually keystoned. I bumped the iPod Touch. It wasn't sitting perpendicular to the lens, so it's kind of like that, I guess. Anyway, so the right side of the image is a little out of focus for that reason. So therefore, I'm out here in the world-famous Joe Van Cleve backyard, and I think I'm just going to take a shot of myself against this trellis. It's cloudy out here, so it should be a fairly low contrast setting. Okay, let's see if I can get this thing lined up. Okay, let's go process that in the iPod and get it to be a low contrast black and white negative image. Okay, so we'll go to the camera roll, and there is this picture. So we're going to edit this initially, and we're going to go to just the monaural black and white mode, and we'll hit done. Okay, now we're going to go to our settings, accessibility, display accommodations, invert colors, smart invert. Go back to our full screen and do the power button, home button, screen grab. Wait for this to disappear. Go back to settings and turn off smart invert. Go back to the photos. There's our negative. So now what I want to do is edit this a little bit and go to the light contrast. I'm going to reduce contrast about like that, so that the highlights on my forehead aren't so blown out. That might be kind of nice. Okay, done. Well, hey, that print came out not too shabby. We'll look at it a little bit closer when we're back in the studio. But in the meantime, I think this little setup, this experiment, is kind of a proof of concept of the idea that you could have an Afghan box camera with a little tablet-like device like the iPod Touch as your digital negative source, and you can print it internally, in this case 135 millimeter lens to roughly 4x5 size paper, and there would be enough room in this box to have your chemical trays here and a paper safe right back here. Well, let's look at our results here. So the initial test here was an exposure of almost a minute. It was actually a minute. So f5.6 wide open on the Fujinon lens. But the meter suggested an exposure that, because of my bellows extension, I was giving it 2 stops extra for bellows extension because I was drawn out so far. When I adjusted the contrast lower on the iPod Touch and re-metered it, it only suggested about 8 seconds exposure. I gave it like 10 seconds at f5.6. So this one, there's a slight focus error on the iPod Touch. Kind of moved a little bit or something, so it wasn't exactly perpendicular to the lens. So you can kind of see that with the keystoning effect here on the top and bottom of the picture a little bit. So consequently, this part was out of focus, this part was better focused. So you can actually use that as an effect, to make an artificial narrow depth of focus if you want to. That is a technique you can do. But anyways, so the exposure is better, not great. And then this third one, this is when I went outside in the backyard, the world-famous Joe Van Cleve backyard, and shot another image, and then lowered the contrast on the digital negative and metered at roughly 8 seconds at f5.6, and I did miss focus. I think I bumped something when I was, my darkroom's pretty small, so the tripod for the Intrepid camera was really close, and I probably kicked the legs or something. So I just printed it here, got the focus better, and this one is really pretty darn good. I'm actually pretty happy with it. So I'm wearing a dark sweater here, a pullover, and you can see that its gray tones are lighter than the darkest tones of the screen of the iPad, which is here and here. And the only thing I think wrong with this, I probably should have given it more exposure. You can see my highlights on my forehead are a little blown out. So there is some room for additional calibrations of the digital negative exposure. And this brings to mind an idea that you have a screen brightness setting on these mobile devices. That's going to affect the exposure overall. So you have to get the digital device to a preset brightness if you want to have consistent results. And then, of course, when you're adjusting the digital negative's tones, you need to figure out how to accurately calibrate that for consistent exposures, keeping in mind the ultimate goal of this is to be able to do this out in the field with clients, right? People on the street or whatever do portraits. And so you have to have a consistent way of working to create a digital negative that'll give you consistent print results. But the idea of this promises to offer a lot more control between taking the picture and having a finished print, and that is kind of exciting. So that's pretty good focus, I'd say, and I don't see any evidence of pixelation or the screen artifacts. See if I can go in closer. That's about as far as this little camcorder goes. But anyways, I don't really see too many digital artifacts other than maybe the highlights on the forehead again, and I need to control that exposure better. Well, this was an interesting experiment today, and that's all this really was a proof of concept that you could take an iOS device like an iPod Touch, an iPhone, even an iPad mini or whatever, and use it as a digital negative. take the photograph with the digital device, which gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of being able to move the camera around, getting different angles compared to using the Afghan box camera itself as the camera. Oh, there's something else you can also do. You can transfer photos from a digital camera, full size like mirrorless or DSLR, which would give you like a narrow depth of focus, the optical effects of a larger sensor. You can transfer them to these devices and then process that image into a digital negative, right? So that gives you even more flexibility. You can use these under dim light, room lighting at night, conditions that with paper negative kinds of camera exposures would just be really impractical without flood lamps or flash. So it opens up a lot of possibilities, this hybrid digital silver gelatin Afghan box camera kind of concept. And of course, using my Intrepid camera was a lot of fun. I haven't used it in a while, and actually that was the first time that I had the bellows fully extended. And it worked okay. It's just at f5.6, the depth of focus is pretty narrow between your digital negative device and the lens. So, I foresee, if this works out, I foresee building an Afghan box camera with the lens here internal, and you open up a front compartment, put your digital negative already turned on and set up in a preset position. I mean, you might have to focus a little bit, twiddle with the focus, but I foresee hopefully that it'll be preset focus. If you're getting the same sized negative to the same size print, right, it shouldn't have to change. And then there should be room in here for your 2 chemical trays and your paper safe and all that. So it's an interesting idea, right, going forward, using the Afghan box camera more as a silver gelatin printing device from a digital negative. Well, this is an interesting concept, and hopefully this year I'm going to go forward with this and see it to fruition, a more practical way of doing this. But I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you have any questions about Afghan box cameras, I would be happy to try to answer them. I will be doing a review in the near future about these 2 books, the Afghan box camera project itself, and these 2 books that are out there, and they're really fascinating. Well, guys, stay creative in these unsettled times. Be well. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye.